Matthew 12, 1-8. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. When the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." But he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests. Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." See also Mark 2, 23-28 and Luke 6, 1-11 for a parallel account. Some have stated that Jesus is breaking the Sabbath and thus setting it aside. This interpretation is problematic in several ways. Let's see what this section is telling us. Firstly, and most importantly, if Jesus were truly disregarding the Sabbath, then he would also be in blatant violation of the law, thus sinning, and, like other examples given in this book, would now be disqualified as the sinless one to atone for the sins of the world. Looking deeper, the examples Jesus brings are those of David and the priesthood. Let's take a moment to explore each of these. David's story can be found in 1 Samuel 21, 1-6. David is on the run from Saul and comes to the tabernacle. He asks Ahimelech, the priest, if food is available for him and his men. Ahimelech responds that there is no common bread, but only the bread that was taken from before the presence of the Lord. He then asks if David and his men have abstained from women. This is effectively asking if he and his men are clean and thus able to eat the sanctified bread. There are two misconceptions to clear up here before we continue. David did not enter the tabernacle, nor did they eat the bread in the tabernacle. The bread has already been removed from the presence of the Lord and replaced with fresh bread. This was done weekly. See Leviticus 24, 5-9. Also notice that David and his men are ritually clean and can consume holy food. He says the bread is in effect common, even though it was consecrated in the vessel this day. Typically, priests and their families consume this bread, but it is given to David in this instance. All this explanation demonstrates is that neither David nor the priests were flippantly ignoring God's commands, but doing everything possible to obey them while maintaining his survival. This is where we get to the interesting part. There is an underlying theme in God's law that David clearly understood and presumably the priests understood as well. A thread running through the entirety of the law is that life is sacred. Many of God's commands prove the fact that the sanctity of life must be maintained. Some have even suggested that the laws about being in a state of clean or unclean are even derived from the idea of maintaining the sanctity of life. So thus, David understood the sanctity of God's dwelling, but he also understood the sanctity of his own and his men's lives. Therefore, he goes to a priest with a request to maintain his life. When the only available option is the consecrated bread, he accepts it, knowing that preserving these lives is of greater importance to God than the sanctity of this bread. Even with that, he does everything possible to offend as little as possible. Regarding the priests working on the Sabbath, we encounter another interesting dynamic of applying God's law. If you read through the Bible, particularly the books of the law, you will find that the priests are called to serve always, even on the Sabbath, while the rest of God's people are resting. In some cases, there is more work to be done by the priests on the Sabbath. How is this permissible? How is this not a contradiction? I think here we are uncovering another precious truth of Scripture. First of all, the Hebrew word for Sabbath, Shabbat, means literally to cease from one's daily activities and make that day set apart, holy, from the others. It does not carry the connotation of rest in the sense of relaxation, but in the sense of ceasing your life and its priorities to focus on God and his priorities for your life. With this perspective in mind, it makes sense that the priests and the Levites continue their work on the Sabbath day. The Levites are entrusted to serve the Lord. Their job is worship. Therefore, their work is not a violation of the Sabbath. Now apply this principle to the context of Matthew 12. Jesus' disciples are faithfully following him, and they were hungry. I make the case that their obedience to the Master is an act of worship to the Lord, and their need to fill their stomachs is an application of preserving human life. Thus, Jesus brings two examples from Scripture to point out the priority here and rebukes the Pharisees for not knowing how to discern such a thing. Additionally, it is essential to understand what the Pharisees understood as working on the Sabbath. The Pharisaical interpretation is extremely legalistic and rigid, and thus lacks discernment with the nuance of Scripture. I would make the case that picking grain as one walks does not qualify as work. It certainly does not qualify as something that distracts from God's priorities in your life, given the circumstances in the text. It's the same idea Jesus presents in Matthew 23:23 when he says, "You pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone." In like manner, Jesus does not say to disregard the Sabbath. Instead, he shows how to discern proper Sabbath observance. The account in Mark includes the line, "And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath." And then concludes, like Matthew, that, "Therefore the Son of Man is also Lord of the Sabbath." The Sabbath was made for our sakes, for us to relate to and connect with God. The moment we take an approach like the Pharisees and turn the Sabbath into a list of things forbidden to us, we've missed the point of the Sabbath completely. Even traditional Judaism touches on this concept similarly. Rabbi Jonathan ben Joseph said, "For it is holy to you. It, the Sabbath, is committed to your hands, not you to its hands."